everybody, and welcome to the latest podcast in the AIDL project. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Jotsna Iyer. And Jotsna was a researcher in Nantes University, and she conducted research for the AIDL project, which is data literacy in the age of AI for education. And I would like to welcome Jotsna to the podcast and for her to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her work.
Hello, everyone. So at the time we were carrying out this literature review, I was working for Nantes University in France, and we were part of this project as part of work packages 2 and 3, which was involved with the diagnosis work and the report that we just made.
So, yes, and on the notes for this podcast, we'll actually have a link to the output that Jotsna is describing, which was a literature review on the topic of data literacy. And this project is looking at the development of data literacy among students in secondary schools across Europe, and particularly in the context of using GenAI. So, Jotsna, what did you do and what were some of the key things that you found?
So we started out asking the questions: what are the definitions and components of data literacy education at school level and how they are evolving? And the second question was, what are the key strategies, pedagogical principles, and tools used for this? Again, at the school level in the context of students and teachers. So what we did was we first did an exploratory research and then tried to find out what kind of publications we want to look at. And using this, we formulated the search term and we found out that we got about a list of 60 papers, peer-reviewed publications, and we tried to find the answers for these two questions in them.
What did you find? I suppose, you did a lot of work. There's a lot of material that you found. I mean, first off, did you find it easy to answer your questions, or did you have to look at this in a slightly different way?
Yes and no, because what we are trying to understand is how the data literacy interventions are changing in the context of generative AI. And because of the peer review processes and the research that goes into these publications, there was a lag between the field of research and actual application in the context of generative AI. So we had to extrapolate a lot. We try to understand the meta elements behind the changes that are happening and how people were responding to changes in technology. And then we tried to garner from this how to go about integrating ourselves the changes that's now being caused by generative AI. So yes, we found a lot of elements spanning from global elements as to how literature education itself is changing to particular specifics on competencies, but also no, because we didn't get the exact answer handed to us on a plate.
Yes, and this was one of the complexities of this particular piece of work. You led this work, and I was quite close working with you on elements of it. In the end, is there one definition of data literacy? I suppose, sometimes I talk to people and they say, oh, yeah, but we need to define data literacy. But did you find one definition of data literacy, or are there multiple, or is it something we can actually define? What did you find out in that?
First of all, we found that data literacy does not exist anymore. It's data literacies. Again, there in the definition itself, it's become this quantity, it is this term which cannot be defined because of the differences in context involved. Here we are talking about teachers, even in a specific context, we are talking about a particular teacher handling a specific subject to a particular age group. Already this is changing because of what happens around them, because of the world which is changing around them, and how they understand data literacy is also changing. So even in this specific cocoon, the data literacy is changing, and then we are taking a step back and asking whether we can define this concept for multiple scenarios and multiple contexts, subjects, students' experiences, and all that, and even for programmers. Like this data literacy as a concept that applies to everyone does not exist, cannot be defined, it cannot be pinned down.
Brilliant. And again, sticking with your findings, you found a lot of things, but what were some of the key takeaways for you as a researcher in this particular piece of work?
Apart from what has already been said, that data literacy is changing, it's ambiguous, it's fluid, and it's subjective. We also found that how technology impacts and is impacted by the data literacy interventions. Technologies not only impact what data literacies are, but how they're experienced, how they are carried out, because we use our data literacies when we're using a technology which involves data, but also the technology gives us some affordances. You're able to, like, before I was not able to deal with a big data set, let's say of 1,000 cases. Now I am able to use it. Before I had to be a programmer to use a database to look at this database and derive some conclusions from it. But now I do not have to be. So the technology also gives us affordances. And in the other context, the competencies that traditionally goes into data literacy is also changed because of these technologies. Some others are added, like understanding generative AI, for example, gets added to the data literacy program. And there is now also information literacy components that get involved in this. So yeah, it's a very interesting and complex interaction that affects multiple aspects.
And just on that last point, I think it's very interesting that, we have all these different types of literacies. We have information literacy, you just mentioned it there. We have media literacy, we have data literacy. And I think one of your findings, we'll call them the walls or the dividers between these literacies, are almost melting away now. It's becoming more and more difficult to differentiate one from another. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. It's also closer to reality. I find that in a classroom, we don't get to control the narrative. We don't get to control the experiences or the doubts of the students when we get asked a question. We cannot really say that, oh, okay, we are dealing with data literacy today, not exactly this point, information literacy, do not ask me this question. It's not really going to work out in the classroom. So I think it's the nature of technology but it's also the nature of reality that these boundaries gets kind of like dissolved.
Brilliant. Thinking over as I said, and people will find the report on the AIDL project website under the diagnosis work package, and we will have a link to that in the show notes. Tell me, I know it's an impossible question. Pick one or two things that you found most interesting from the research that you carried out.
Because we talked so much about what data literacy is not, Michael, I would like to see what data literacy is also about. I think what really struck me was that data literacy, I mean, literacy is we are dealing with an abstraction of reality, right? And what we do not get to ask in other literacies, we get to ask in data literacy, as in like where data itself breaks down. I mean, where this abstraction fails. So I think data literacy is like now about seeing better. It's about clarity behind the processes, how these processes are carried out in the field, how data is collected, how data is cleaned, but also about like where it breaks down, as in what gets highlighted when I take a subset or distortion of reality as a data set. So what gets ignored and whose claims are supported and whose claims are not supported. Here we see elements of critical literacies, multiple literacies, and new literacies having their impact on data literacies, and also data literacy as an element which goes further and asks like what this data is being used in which context and where it breaks down. Even the mathematics, like let's say something like arithmetic mean applied to a column of a data set. What does it really mean in this context? Like, is it supposed to mean what it means? Because we all use arithmetic mean and has this allure of objectivity and this mathematical proclamation to it, but then it's also a subjective when we're using it to something like data. So I think if data literacy is about something, it's about seeing the data processes better and seeing the links of these processes with reality and how the data and the process itself, but how they are transformed mathematically, statistically, and also by machines that we do not really understand. Even the programmers do not understand what's happening inside them. So I think if data literacy is something, it's about clarity behind this process which involves data.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm hearing strongly, and I know it's a word that appeared a lot in your report, is critical. And that notion of criticality and looking beyond the data to construct meaning. But I'm conscious that we're coming to the end of this very short chat about your work. And my final question is, how can the review and just what you've been talking about there inform the creation of the AIDL framework? Because ultimately, this project is about trying to develop a framework that focuses specifically on data literacy in the context of generative AI usage in secondary school classrooms, something that's real for the teachers and for their students. And many of these teachers, as we both know, will not be computer science teachers or mathematical teachers. Some will be, but the others will be language teachers and others. So, how can your work help inform the creation of this framework?
The framework and training, or just the framework, Michael?
Both, yeah. I mean, you've reminded me, not alone are we creating a framework, but we also, at the moment, our colleagues in Work Package 3, in INTEF, in the Spanish ministry, are actually well on the way to developing a set of teacher professional learning experiences or training that teachers will engage with in the new school year.
Because of the problems with definitions of data literacy, framework can really be of help because it's giving a structure to the data literacy intervention by saying what goes into it and what competencies have to be treated in any data literacy intervention as a minimum. From there, the teachers can take it. So this framework as a guidebook or I think you said it should be a checklist as to
A
what should be
tool,
treated and what should not be treated.
yeah, I call it a tool. I and Deirdre Butler, we refer to frameworks typically as a tool to think with. So it's getting you to think. It's a bit like you were saying there when you're coming on these data. So yeah, let's think of it as a checklist, set of questions.
Perfect. As a rule, I don't correct definitions from Michael and Rhea Reason. It's this perfect tool which can structure this intervention. And then with this tool in hand, what we can do is co-construct data literacies, like talk with the teachers and ask what's pertinent to them. And then we create the program along with the teachers for taking the program and whoever else that is involved in the program, not only the teachers. And we also discuss pedagogy, what's relevant to them. We scaffold it and we discuss legalities and what happens in the classrooms. And from here, we also set the community of practices at which the project is already doing to not only see how their analysis is evolving and also how their needs are evolving. And from there, I think critical thinking becomes really, really, really important because in the training, it becomes less abstract. And we have to look at critical thinking both in the short term and in the long term. Short term, I would say, like how to ask guiding questions, how to take critical thinking, how to make a habit out of critical thinking. And but also in the long term, because one of the papers I think was Ilomaki, which said that taking a critical approach to data is fruitless without a sound knowledge of content, context, and processes. So before we can critique something, we should know that it's open to question. And this is where I think a lot of training can help because we should know that all these data processes happen in a social, economic, and political context, and these can be critiqued. And this long-term approach to critical thinking, along with the content, which will help us ask questions of it, should be what we should be aiming at or facilitating.
I think this has been a really short but a really interesting chat with you, Jotsna, as always. And I think one of the points there as I'm listening to you is something that we are trying to do in this project. You come from that world of data scientists, computer scientists, and data is the world that you live in. However, we are trying to bring this into a classroom setting where often teachers and students don't engage with data in a meaningful way and they see it sometimes as something that they're afraid of or they typically don't engage with. So I think bringing this context, this wider context, is really important, and your work is helping us in the project to bring this to life. So I want to thank you for all the work you've done and for making time to chat with us today. And if people want to look at your work in more detail, they will find it on the AIDL website. But I'll give you the final word if you want to say anything.
Thanks a lot for this opportunity, Michael. And also, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the partners with whom we had very fruitful discussions and also those who I actually helped carry out the literature research.